Oh, great, perfect. So we can do this then. So listen up. It was the last week of Jesus' ministry, the last week of his life. And he was in the temple, and he was teaching, and he was preaching, and he was doing the stuff that Jesus did once the temple had kind of been opened up to him a little bit, that last week of his life. And so he's teaching in the temple. And as he is, there was something that he noticed that he wanted everybody else to notice. The type of thing that most people had seen, like they would have all been able to recognize that, hey, this is the thing that's happening. But, sometimes you see things and you don't see them. And in this case, Jesus wanted his audience to kind of pay attention to and notice something that they had looked at and they had noticed, but they had maybe not understood. So as he was teaching, he was in the temple and he was within his eyesight, his eye shot. I don't think eye shot's a word. Earshot's a word. I don't know what the equivalent of earshot is. So the equivalent of earshot, but he could see it. Eye shot, I guess. He could see, that's the word. It's just he could see. He could see the offering box where people dropped off money for the temple treasury. The temple treasury, which would go theoretically to the people and definitely to the priesthood and everything and the upkeep of the temple and theoretically to the people that are in need. And he sees people just going by over and over and over, dropping money in. And the people that he sees dropping money in are people who, they had a lot of money to give. It's the Passover time, which means people would come from all over the empire, from all over the Jewish world to put money, not to put money, but to come for the Passover. And so if you could travel a great distance, you probably had some disposable income. You probably had some money that you could afford to do something with, especially depending on the timing of Jesus clearing out the temple. You may have some extra money because you thought you'd have to buy like a sheep or something and change your money, and Jesus has cleared it all out so you don't have to. So the point is, there's lots of people who had lots of money who were giving money into this temple treasury. And you think, well, that's a good thing. That's a great thing. Good job for giving to potentially poor and needy people, and definitely to the temple. Well, amongst these really wealthy people, there was a small woman, a small, frail, little old lady that Jesus noticed that maybe other people might not have noticed. You would certainly not notice her amongst the people who were putting lots of money in, because all she put in the treasury was 2 coins. In our world, each coin is worth about 2 pennies each. So she drops 4 cents into the money box. Now, I understand inflation is a thing that impacts us all, but there has never been a point in time when 4 cents is anything. Like, it's not an amount of money that you're not going to do anything with that. You don't start like a building project with, 4 cents. We're off to a good start. It's nothing, right? She drops in these 2 coins that are essentially nothing. And that's the whole thing. Like, nobody would have noticed what this woman was doing. And Jesus wanted them to. So he interrupts what he's talking about. Whatever he's teaching, I have no idea, what he's doing, but he interrupts what he's doing and he tells everybody, he says, hey, everybody look over there. Look at what's happening here. And he says, this small woman, this widow, this woman with nothing, who gave nothing, he said her gift was the biggest gift I've seen today. She has given more than everybody else has given, even combined. Like, her gift is so much bigger than the gifts of these people. And of course, that's a weird thing to say, because anybody who knows math knows that, 4 cents is less than 5 cents, which is less than, the large dollar figures that the people were giving. These wealthy people from all over the empire were giving. But what Jesus said was really interesting. He said that the people who were wealthy, they had given a portion of their excess income, right? Like, they weren't giving the money that was going to basic necessities. They weren't giving their tax money or their mortgage, their grocery bill. Like, they were not giving money that they actually needed. They were giving money that was on top of the money they had that they needed. So there was this surplus, this excess. And they weren't even giving all of it. They were just giving a portion of the excess. which is really not that much of a gift at all when you think about it. A portion of the excess is not really a sacrifice. Like, they could do this all day, hand over fist, no problem. But this woman, Jesus said, all she had in the world was those 2 coins. All she had. She's a widow. In their culture, she has no ability to like go get a job and feed herself. It's not the way this worked. She needed somebody to care for her, and she apparently didn't have it. And so, she's out here on her own in this really destitute situation. And Jesus said her sacrifice of giving absolutely everything she had is the greatest thing I've seen today. That's beautiful. It's amazing. What an amazing gift this woman did in giving those coins, which is all that she had, to the temple treasury. Now, the traditional interpretation of this is extremely simple. It's really, really easy. And for like 2,000 years, essentially, people have all understood this story as essentially meaning Jesus is teaching that generosity and giving is never about an actual dollar figure. It's never really ever about the thing, right? Like, what we give is never about what we give. It's about the reason we do it. It's about our motivations. It's about what's in our heart. It's about how much, like, the love that we give things with, right? That, that a sacrifice of giving of what is ours that we need is a much greater gift than, a larger gift, but like that doesn't mean anything, right? The idea is that giving's not giving. In other words, like, it's never just, Jim Bob gave 1,000 and Henrietta gave 800, so Jim Bob wins. That's not the way God looks at it. God owns everything. It doesn't matter to God exactly. Like, nobody's going to impress God with how much, like, there's no amount of money you could be like, hey, God, look at my bank account. And God be like, oh, impressive. Like, God made up reality. So, like, he's not he owns everything. So the idea has always been traditionally that what Jesus is teaching is that we should be like this woman, meaning we should be giving out of a spirit of sacrifice and love and generosity, whether we have a lot or not. Because it's not about an amount, it's about what we're doing. Simple enough to understand. The problem is, in the modern world, this whole thing's happening. It's great. And maybe it's happening in every generation, but it's certainly happening in mine, where we look at these Bible verses and we're like, those things don't mean what they very obviously mean. And in this case, this is one of those classic stories where some modern folks don't like that interpretation and they don't like that understanding. And so they have, instead of dealing with that, they've changed it. And so there's a lot of modern folks who will look at it and say, whoa. Jesus is not uplifting this woman. Why would he uplift a woman who has given everything she had? Why does Jesus would never say that, like, poverty is good. Jesus would never, ever, even in his most famous thing that he ever preached, start that sermon by talking about blessed are poor people. He would never say that. So because he never said that, you don't want this lady to be poor. Jesus was actually being sarcastic, and he was actually condemning the religious leaders of the temple who were giving money to the temple treasury while this woman who has nothing is just right there, and they're ignoring her. And that actually, it's sort of the same kind of condemnation and judgment of the temple that you see with the cleansing of the temple, right? That the people, they had bad priorities and bad motives, and so Jesus saying this woman gave more is actually sarcasm, and it's meant to shame those people. Okay, I mean, maybe, I guess. I'm goofing a little bit because Jesus did in fact one day say, "Blessed are the poor," so the whole premise seems wrong, but whatever. I don't even want to take a side on that. I just want to say this story is interesting to me for actually a third reason. I think this story, as we look at it and we understand it and we think about it, this story, I think, is maybe better understood, not in the traditional sense, not in the modern sense, but in the Jesus sense. And what I mean is this. When you think about it, this woman is a lot of things. She's a widow, she's poor, she's destitute, she's an object lesson in Jesus' sermon, but she also is incredibly Christ-like. She is, in fact, maybe the single most Christ-like person that Jesus ever encounters in his ministry. And here's why I say that. I say that because this woman gave everything that she had to God and God's people. And Jesus gives everything he has to God and God's people. So one day Jesus is out with his disciples, and two of them, two of the better ones, really, they had this ranking system. Maybe that's a whole other conversation too, but we'll just say they're good. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. There's two brothers, and they're like, hey, listen, Jesus, I got this request. So we understand that you are the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and you've got this kingdom, and one day you are going to sit on this glorious, amazing throne. What are the odds that we could have the best seats next to you? We're not. You can haggle between, like, for yourself, which one of us gets the number one seat. But one of us goes on your right hand, one of us goes on the left hand. You're the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and we are numbers 2 and 3. What are the odds we could do that? Now, I think that if you catch Jesus on the wrong day with that, we're going to get in some rebuke territory, right? Because that's a little selfish, if nothing else. But on this day, I think Jesus is more like amused than anything else, because he's like, hey, okay, well, I'll tell you what. Here's a question. I'll answer your question with another question. The only reason that I'm going to get that throne is because I'm going to suffer horribly. So I guess here's my question for you, fellas. Are you willing to suffer like me? And they're like, absolutely we are. And I am positive that they had no idea what they were asking for. I equally am positive that they do suffer exactly that way. So it works out kind of okay. Jesus ends up being like, look, I can't give you that. I don't even know, like, we're dealing in like metaphor and stuff, and you're dealing in weird literal stuff. God's going to be deciding all this stuff. Look, you're going to suffer, going to be king, and the rest we'll figure out later. And of course, the other disciples don't like this. They don't like that these other two had the audacity to ask that. More likely, they didn't like that these other two thought of it first. You know, if I know what I could ask for that. Peter absolutely was like, whoa, I didn't know that was on the table. Definitely would have asked them that myself. But they get all angry. They get upset. And so Jesus has to, like, kind of get, gather them up, like, get them all together, have a little powwow, like coach team conversation. And he kind of tries to set the record straight about power and authority and also who he is. And this is what we read in the Gospel according to Mark. Jesus talking to his disciples. He says this, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people. Officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. There's a lot we could talk about in that passage. Whole lot. Starting with the way that governments and rulers and authorities work, filtering down to the way we are supposed to work, all of that. But tonight is Good Friday. Tonight is the night that we celebrate, remember, mourn, all of those things together. The fact that Jesus died on the cross. And so Jesus references his death there. And we should certainly talk about the death that he references. And he references his death with a really sort of odd metaphor, an odd illustration. Like, he could have talked about his death as anything. Right? Like, he's unjustly killed, right? Like, he is murdered, you could call it. He is executed by the state. He suffered, we read elsewhere, he suffers a criminal's death. He could have talked about that. I mean, there's all sorts of ways we can talk about this, but Jesus gives us the illustration of a ransom. And a ransom tells us that there's different principal characters going on, right? For a ransom to exist, you have to have 4 elements. Okay, the ransom, Jesus has said, is him. He dies as a ransom. So that's one of the elements of a ransom. Okay, the second element you have to have is people who need to be ransomed. You need to have people who are kidnapped, right? Like, a ransom does not work at all if no one is in captivity. Like you'd have to be the dumbest criminal ever. Like nobody takes your kids, but they call them and be like, "I'll give your kids back if you give me money." Like my kids are right here. Oh, wrong number. That would be the worst criminal in the world. So you have to have people who are taken. And you also have to have somebody on the phone making the demand. You have to have the guy who took them. Which leaves our last one. You have to have somebody who is physically paying the ransom. So you gotta have captives. You gotta have a kidnapper. You gotta have a person paying the ransom, and then you actually have to have the ransom itself. You have to have those 4 elements to be a ransom. Otherwise, it's not a ransom. So Jesus has given us the first part of the puzzle. He has said that he, in his death, very specifically, he is the ransom. So the question we should naturally ask is, who are the people who are captive? Who is the guy taken captive? And who's the guy paying the ransom? Now, when I say that, every person in this room who's listening, immediately in your head, filled those in. Pretty simple. The problem is, we live in a world where there's lots of different churches. And there's lots of different preachers. And there's lots of different ideas. And some of them are better than others. I'm going to say that as generously as I can. I want to be that woman dropping her coins. I want to be as generous as I can. Some of them are a little bit better. And especially in the last, 500 years, since an event that I won't mention, people very often get confused about this whole ransom thing. And so we should I just want to make sure, as we remember Christ's death, as we understand what he says about his death being a ransom, that we get what he's saying, that we pick up what he's putting down, that we step in what he's... This is what we read in the book of Hebrews. Lays it all out. It's just right here for us. Hebrews chapter 2. This is what we read about Christ and us and this whole ransom thing. We can put all the pieces together here in a minute. It says, what we do see is Jesus, who for a little while was given a position a little lower than the angels. And because he suffered death for us, he is now crowned with glory and honor. Yes, by God's grace, Jesus tasted death for everyone. God, for whom and through whom everything was made, chose to bring many children into glory. And it was only right that he should make Jesus, through his suffering, a perfect leader, fit to bring them into their salvation. Couple of verses later, because Jesus' children are human beings made of flesh and blood, the Son also became flesh and blood. For only as a human being could he die, and only by dying could he break the power of the devil, who had the power of death. Only in this way could he set free all who have lived their lives as slaves to the fear of dying. Okay, super, super simple. We have 4 elements. We already know one of them, okay? So the ransom is Jesus. The people who have been kidnapped is us. It's humanity. It's us. It's us. We who are slaves to sin, who are slaves to fear, who are enslaved by sin and darkness and all of that. And also the guy who does the kidnapping, well, that's Satan. Satan does that. Now, this freaks people out sometimes, because sometimes we're like, well, I don't believe in Satan, because we have this thing in our heads where, like, we've got this pop culture thing where it's like this dude, and he's got the terrible little French beard, and also he's got, like, he's got the horns, and he's got the tail, and he's got the pitchfork. You know what I'm talking about? And so we're like, well, I don't believe in that guy. Well, I don't believe in that guy either. That's a Halloween costume. I literally, as I was describing that, was picturing something on Amazon. Like, that's not it. But Satan is real. It's very real. Jesus calls Satan the ruler of the world. The Apostle Paul actually goes so far as to say that Satan is the god of this age. And oh, by the way, we live in the age Paul did. Satan is very, very real and does a lot of stuff. And so the reality is, it's what we see then is that Satan is the guy who takes the kidnapping, and then we are the kidnappers, and Jesus is the ransom, and God, being loving and gracious and kind and merciful, is the one who pays the ransom. Now, this is a metaphor, okay? There's not literally a phone in heaven. And, one day God's just hanging out with the angels, like making planets, sending asteroids to dinosaurs. Like, I don't know what God does all day, but like just doing God stuff. And one day, like the phone rings, ring, ring, and it's definitely one of those old school phones that's got the rotor. That's the phone that God has. He does not trust cell phones. Doesn't like them. And so the ring, ring, ring. And so like, oh, hello, it's the devil. And he's like, I've got your kids. That's not it. That would be not a metaphor. That's sort of the idea. We need to understand, okay? It's really like it can be hard for us to admit this on several levels. Number one, to understand that evil is very real. And that when we succumb to evil, when we give in to temptation, when we choose to sin, when we choose not to love, when we choose not to love ourselves or love other people, when we choose to hurt people or ourselves, when we choose to ignore God and rebel against God, when we make those choices, we become enslaved. Not because God is out here like, well, I'm separating from you. But no, it's like that story in the Garden of Eden. Like as soon as they sin, they cover up and they hide from God. Because that's what sin does. Sin causes us to turn our backs on God and walk away. And we become ensnared. We become enslaved. We become people who need help. And so God says, well, I'd like to help you. And so that's where Christ comes in. Jesus is the ransom. He dies so that we might live. Now, here's why this is really, really important. For the last couple of months, we've been talking about all the different people who want Jesus dead. You know, and it's been a menagerie of people. Like starting with like the people in his hometown and then the Pharisees, and then you end up with like, you know, all the way up to Judas, like one of his disciples, and all these things. We talked about, you know, then we talked about the people who like didn't like, Pilate doesn't even want him killed, but he ends up having to do it. And so all these people that want Jesus dead. The important thing we need to understand is this. Jesus only dies because he wanted to. That's it. On the night that he's arrested, all these people show up, all these soldiers, all these troops, and they've got like pitchforks and you know, like torches and stuff. And they go to arrest Jesus, and one of his, you know, best friends, Peter, pulls out a sword and goes to fight. And you know, Jesus says, "Man, what are you doing?" And he tells him, "You do realize that if I felt like it, I could call down armies from heaven, thousands of angels. Like, no one's touching me unless I'm letting them." Jesus makes it clear. He only dies because he wants to. And he doesn't just make it clear in that moment. Peter should have understood, because Peter was there when, at another time, during another festival, Jesus was in Jerusalem, and he was talking about who he is. And he gave another metaphor, another illustration that's way more famous than the ransom thing. And he ends up saying, hey, look, I'm the good shepherd. And he talks about what it means to be a shepherd. He says, look, it's my job to protect the sheep, to guide the sheep, to make sure that no one gets to the sheep. That, you know, there's thieves and there's bandits and there's animals. There's all sorts of dangers out here, and it's my job to make sure everybody's fine. And Jesus ends up saying, look, I am the only one who can do this. He says there's other people who've tried, other people who came before me who tried to be shepherds to God's people, and all of them failed. They were all thieves and liars. All of them, which is quite the claim given some of the folks who came before Jesus. But he insists, I'm the only one who can do this. And then he lets everything know. He lets everybody know. He says, this is always up to me. What's going to happen, what does happen, it's up to me. This is what we read one last time, the Gospel of John. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, they know me, just as my Father knows me and I know the Father. So I sacrifice my life for the sheep. I have other sheep too that are not in this sheepfold, and I must bring them also. They will listen to my voice, and they will be one flock with one shepherd. The Father loves me because I sacrifice my life so that I may take it back again. No one can take my life from me. I sacrifice it voluntarily, for I have the authority to lay it down when I want to, and also to take it back up again, for this is what my Father has commanded. See that woman in the temple? She gave everything she had. She didn't have to. Nobody forced her. Nobody said, hey, this is what you have to do. out of the goodness of her heart because she loved the people in her world. She loved people. She loved God, but she loved people. She wanted to do something good for people. And so she gave everything that she possessed. So that way people could be taken care of. And that's beautiful. And that is the most Christ-like figure we can see. Because Jesus did exactly the same thing. Because he loves you and he loves me, and because you are loved and I am loved, and because God sees us all as important. God sees us as valuable. God made creation and then decided, I want people in it. And even when we got ourselves kidnapped, so to speak, that didn't change his mind. Even when we sin, it doesn't change his mind. God loves you, and when you sin, he says, well, I still love you. There's not a single thing you could do to change God's love for you. And so God says, okay, well, we got to bring these people home. Gotta do the whole thing. It's like, hey, Jesus, you want to go and take care of this? And Jesus is like, yeah, absolutely. No problem. He's like, it's going to cost everything. And Jesus is like, yeah, no problem. Jesus gave everything he had for us. You know, sometimes we think about Good Friday and the question around why is Good Friday called Good Friday, and it's tough as a preacher. Let's be honest. Like, I woke up this morning and the first thing I look at is on Facebook, and it's a preacher that I like very much who's like, "You shouldn't be happy today." And I get it, because like Good Friday is terrible. Like, God became a person, and then we're like, better put him on a cross. Like, the fact that Jesus dies the way he dies it just shows the debased sinfulness that humanity has. It's the worst of us. But Good Friday is good. Not because we are, but because Jesus is. On Good Friday, Jesus said, you guys being terrible changes nothing. I love you, and so I will give everything for you. The woman giving the gifts gave everything. Jesus gave everything. And so here we are, understanding that none of this was us. This was a unilateral move where Jesus just said, I just want to save all you guys. And so tonight, as we celebrate, I guess, mourn, whatever it is, whatever's not going to get me in trouble with other Christians who all have opinions, as we consider Good Friday, we take communion. And when this is, look, full disclosure, part of this is because we take communion all the time. That's sort of our thing. We're like, man, Jesus said to always do it, and so we always do it. Because, we're not literal about everything, but that one we've picked. So there's that. But this is the most appropriate time to take communion. Because when Jesus said communion was a thing, when he made it up, he said, this is my body, this is my blood. The cup, the bread. Everything that Christ is, he gives for us. It is a unilateral move to save humanity. Everything he does is a gift to us because everything he does is out of love for us. And so he gave everything to pay everything so we can be free and we can be saved. And so that's what we remember in communion. We remember Christ, his sacrifice that he wanted to. Of all the people that wanted Jesus dead, none of it happens without Jesus just saying, well, I'm at the front of the line. I also want to be dead. Because only as a human being who dies can I save all of these people. Can I pay the ransom to bring them home and show them just how dearly and how deeply I love them. Tonight, that's going to be the end of our service. I'm going to pray right now. Jamie's going to play pretty music. Communion's up here. I mean this when I say this. Take as much time as you want. I'm not going anywhere. Take as much time as you want to sit, reflect, And then communion's up here for you as you take it. And then you can have a good night, and we'll see you guys Sunday morning. Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, just so grateful. I'm so grateful that Jesus wanted to die for us. I'm so grateful that when we needed help, that he wanted to be the help. We're so grateful that he gave everything so that we could live. I'm grateful that the ransom did not go unpaid. Thank you for your love. And I pray that everyone who's in here would know that they are loved, would know that that is unconditional, and that if we ever question, we ever wonder if we are loved, we can simply remember the cross where Christ gave everything for us out of love. We thank you this night, and we thank you each day. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.